Greetings and welcome to room 303 in Junior English. We now turn in our Junior English hymnal to page 1026, 1027 and Bernard Malamud's The First 7 Years. Let's introduce ourselves to Malamud really quickly. Notice your dates here, 1914 to 1986. We have a number of writers who recently we've studied who were all born in 1914. Let's learn a little bit about him. Malamud was born in, I'm reading on page 1027, was born in Brooklyn, New York, the son of Russian immigrants. His father ran a grocery store and worked hard to forge a better life for his family. According to his own account, Malamud's boyhood was comparatively happy. He grew up hearing the constant mingling of Yiddish and English. Yiddish is a form of dialect form of Hebrew and English. An experience that contributed to his fine ear for the rhythms of spoken dialogue. We'll want to concentrate on this, by the way, in our reading of the story, is the beautiful rhythms of his dialogue. A favorite boyhood pastime was listening to his father recount tales of Jewish life in pre-revolutionary Russia. Young Bernard began to display his father's gift for telling stories when, recovering from pneumonia at age 9, he spent hours in the back room of the family store writing down the stories he had composed to tell his friends. The next heading, a literary range. Malamud attended City College of New York and Columbia University and began publishing stories in a number of well-known magazines. Despite the strong influence of Yiddish folk tales, many of Malamud's stories are drawn from this tradition. His work depicts a broad range of settings and characters. From the gifted baseball player in The Natural, 1952, which, by the way, was turned into an amazing film years later, Robert Redford's film, to the handyman living in Tsarist Russia in the Pulitzer Prize-winning The Fixer, 1966. All of his characters come across as real and accessible with universal hopes and concerns. Malamud's other novels include The Assistant, 57, A New Life, 61, The Tenant, 71, and Dubin's Lives, 1979. He also wrote numerous short stories, many of which were published in The Magic Barrel, 1958, which won the National Book Award. The final heading, A Touch of Magic. Malamud tells his stories in spare, compressed prose, sprinkled with flashes of highly charged metaphorical language. He allows magical events to happen in gloomy city neighborhoods and gives his hardworking characters unexpected flashes of passion. Some Malamud stories move readers to sadness as characters struggle courageously against tragedy. The First 7 Years depicts a Polish immigrant's desire to see his daughter achieve a better life. His notion of that life, however, is not the same as hers. Let's go ahead and turn now to page 1026 and work at 2B for just a moment. Literary analysis. A story follows a sequence of events called a plot. We've talked about this before, which is organized into distinct phases. This is obviously recapitulation, but let's review nonetheless. We have always, again, it's that plot hill. If you want to draw that really quickly at 2B, where you draw your little plot hill right down in your notes, you'll remember that the beginning is the exposition, the setting, the characters, the situation. You have an inciting incident, which establishes the central conflict. Remember, the conflict can either be an internal conflict, character versus self, or an external conflict, character versus other characters, character versus nature, character versus some idea of society. During the development of the rising action, the climax is going to, or the conflict is going to increase. The plot reaches a high point of interest or suspense at the climax when the conflict comes to its ultimate fruition. And then finally you have the resolution, which explains the end of the central conflict. Note that many modern stories, such as this one, have no resolution. Instead, a character may experience an epiphany. I would write that word down. That's an important word for us. Epiphany, or moment of insight that affects the conflict but does not resolve it. I would, as you write down the word epiphany, jump really quickly in your notes as well to 3A. And James Joyce, the great Irish writer who we'll study in your senior year together, who is very much about this epiphany, a realization that forever changes the character in some profound way. These events, to keep reading. The events that lead up to the climax make up the rising action. Those that follow make up the falling action. Some have called it the denouement. Along the way, writers may also use foreshadowing or clues to hint at what will happen next. We saw this, for example, in O'Connery's The Life You Saved May Be Your Own conversation. Foreshadowing can increase suspense, help build toward the climax. It also creates a sense of unity in a story as hints planted early in the plot develop into meaningful moments later. As you read, notice how the author builds the conflict through the phases of the plot. We've also got the idea of themes and to practice the process of summarizing to get to those themes under reading strategy using the graphic that's there to the right. Also, do point out those 5 words. Make sure they're in your notes as well on page 1026. They will end up in the exam as well. All right, let's turn to 1028. This verse 7 years, again, is the name of the story. Let's read a little bit of background here information. During World War II, millions of Jews were murdered by the Nazis under the direction of German dictator Adolf Hitler. Many Jewish refugees immigrated to the United States, a pattern that continued after the end of the war. This story takes place in the 1950s. I would write that down at level 1. This story takes place in the 1950s when Holocaust survivors like Sobel, the shoemaker's assistant, struggled to establish new lives in the United States. Okay, let's go ahead and jot down now at level 1 what our goal here is as we read this story. We are looking to try to understand, write it down, what is the central conflict struggle in the story. Write that down at level 1. You should also put that, or circle that, because you already wrote down the word conflict at level 2b, the rhetorical level of reading. And we will come back to ask some qualifiers about this conflict. So we're now going to pay attention to the story. As good readers do, let's scan the story really quickly. Notice as you turn, you've got some pictures that obviously you're going to begin to understand, have some ability to connect. And we'll be finished then on page 1037 of the story. It always makes sense, again, just for a reading suggestion, just for when, for example, you're getting ready for your ACT, any section of the ACT, always scan through the whole section first, just to make sure that you understand what it is that you're looking at. The lay of the land, we might say. All right? All right, here we go. We've got professional reader now. Follow along. Again, don't just listen to the story. Read the story as you are trying to develop your reading ability. All right? The first 7 years. Let's go to work with it.
The First 7 Years by Bernard Malamud. Feld, the shoemaker, was annoyed that his helper, Sobel, was so insensitive to his reverie that he wouldn't for a minute cease his fanatic pounding at the other bench. He gave him a look, but Sobel's bald head was bent over the last as he worked, and he didn't notice. The shoemaker shrugged and continued to peer through the partly frosted window at the nearsighted haze of falling February snow. Neither the shifting white blur outside, nor the sudden deep remembrance of the snowy Polish village where he had wasted his youth could turn his thoughts from Max, the college boy. A constant visitor in the mind since early that morning when Feld saw him trudging through the snowdrifts on his way to school, whom he so much respected because of the sacrifices he had made throughout the years, in winter or direst heat, to further his education. An old wish returned to haunt the shoemaker, that he had had a son instead of a daughter. But this blew away in the snow, for Feld, if anything, was a practical man. Yet he could not help but contrast the diligence of the boy, who was a peddler's son, with Miriam's unconcern for an education. True, she was always with a book in her hand. Yet when the opportunity arose for a college education, she had said no, she would rather find a job. He had begged her to go, pointing out how many fathers could not afford to send their children to college. But she said she wanted to be independent. As for education, what was it, she asked, but books, which Sobel, who diligently read the classics, would as usual advise her on. Her answer greatly grieved her father.
All right, let's pause for a moment, just for a second now. That's your exposition. That's the beginning of the story. We're analyzing, again, great storytelling. So notice in the exposition we have several things. What are they? Introduction of characters. Can you list them really quickly at level 1? Introduction of setting. Where are we? Should you be able to know that by now? Yes. You also have a bit of background. You also have some sense of time. We are in what time of the year, for example. We know it's February and we know that it's nasty snow outside. We also already have an introduction to the conflict of the story. Whoa, notice, we are not even 150, 200 words into the story, and we already have amazing information provided for us. What is the central conflict? Write it down in terms of the larger parameters. You have a father, you have a daughter. The father, of course, wants to tell the daughter what to do. And the daughter says that she wants to be independent. By the way, notice that the crux of this conflict or struggle is what? The question about whether one should get an education or not. I have a number of juniors who already are beginning to identify with this story. Here's why. They live in a house with a parent who would like to tell them what to do, and they often won't do it. Sound like a junior or two that you knew about in your life? How about this one? Maybe some of us live in houses where we have parents who have said, when you graduate, and you will graduate, you will be going to college. Not a job, college. That's what you're going to do to get an education. Has it ever been true in the history of Royal High School that one or two juniors looked back at their parents and said, yeah, no. Not interested in college, hated it all the way through 12 years of it. 12 years of education, I hated it. I am not going to go on and get more education. I'm going to go get myself a job. I'm going to make myself some. See how that works, right? Okay? So you already have that tension at play here. Already have that going on. All right, let's keep going. Now that you're kind of into the beginning of the story, let's continue now to follow along. Pay attention close.
Emerged from the snow, and the door opened. At the counter, the man withdrew from a wet paper bag a pair of battered shoes for repair. Who he was, the shoemaker for a moment had no idea. Then his heart trembled as he realized, before he had thoroughly discerned the face, that Max himself was standing there, embarrassedly explaining what he wanted done to his old shoes. Though Feld listened eagerly, he couldn't hear a word, for the opportunity that had burst upon him was deafening. He couldn't exactly recall when the thought had occurred to him, because it was clear he had more than once considered suggesting to the boy that he go out with Miriam. But he had not dared speak, for if Max said no, how would he face him again? Or suppose Miriam, who harped so often on independence, blew up in anger and shouted at him for his meddling. Still, the chance was too good to let by. All it meant was an introduction. They might long ago have become friends had they happened to meet somewhere. Therefore, was it not his duty, an obligation, to bring them together? Nothing more. A harmless connivance to replace an accidental encounter in the subway, let's say. Or a mutual friend's introduction in the street. Just let him once see and talk to her, and he would for sure be interested. As for Miriam, what possible harm for a working girl in an office who met only loudmouthed salesmen and illiterate shipping clerks to make the acquaintance of a fine scholarly boy? Maybe he would awaken in her a desire to go to college. If not, the shoemaker's mind at last came to grips with the truth. Let her marry an educated man and live a better life.
One of the geniuses of great writing is that it shows you things, it discloses to you things that you cannot see in movie, or regularly can't see in movies. For example, all that actually physically is transpired is what? Some guys walk through the door of a shoemaker's business. That's all that's happened physically. What's happened intellectually, though, in the mind of the father? He's doing one of these numbers. Should I what? Well, now we'll talk about parents and the challenge of being parents. If a good story does anything, it challenges students to crawl inside the minds of somebody other than themselves. And guess what? Do you think it's ever been the case in the history of the world that parents want to say something, but they're worried? Should I say? Should I not say? Parents in the history of the world, do you think it's ever been the case, want to do something, but now they're playing this game with themselves? Oh no, if I say or do something, will my son or daughter hate me? Will they be mad at me? What? Of course, looked at from the outside, at first, my juniors struggle with this idea. Think of it this way. If on your way out of school today, you stumble across some sixth grader who walks up to you and says, hey, I need you to sit down. I got some things I need to tell you. Your first instincts with the sixth grader will be, I'm sorry, but you need to get out of my way, or my hand's going to make sure that you do get out of my way. In other words, I tell you, you don't tell me. Which does beg a really interesting question. Why is it the case that in a parent's mind, there would be any conflict at all about this situation? Why doesn't he just say, I am the father, she is the daughter, I will tell her what to do? the dynamics of being a parent, right? You want to have influence, but you don't want to have a fight. And so, what's the debate? Well, do I introduce them? Do I not introduce them? One of my juniors once said, I get what you're saying. What you're saying is parents have to decide whether they're going to embarrass us or not. Which is really funny, because a lot of times parents will say, the very first time I embarrassed my daughter, I was just having this conversation with a guy who told me the other day he was in the middle school. His daughter is in the middle school, and he knew that she was in a class. So he just thought he would stop by her room, put his head in and go, hi honey, how's it going? It had not occurred to him that a 7th grade girl would not want her father showing up at her classroom, putting his head in the room and going, hey honey, how's it going? Until after he did it. And she was, of course, horrified. And he reported to me, for the first time I realized, oh, I could totally embarrass my kids. But I didn't really enjoy that, and I certainly didn't enjoy the way she raked me over the coals afterwards. Notice the dad's dilemma here. So let's write it in our notes. You have another conflict. If the first conflict is the conflict outright with his daughter, you're going to college, she says, no, I'm getting a job. The second conflict is even more subtle. Should I embarrass her or not? I want to set this up though. By the way, let's also point out, this is always one of the concerns for parents. Will my child grow up to find someone to cohabitate with and possibly marry? Now, why would parents be at all interested in this? One quick answer is because they don't want you living in their house forever. Another answer is they don't want their children to be alone. Another answer, of course, is they would like to have grandchildren someday. See how this works? You got multiple concerns going on all at the same time. Let's keep reading now.
When Max finished describing what he wanted done to his shoes, Feld marked them, both with enormous holes in the soles, which he pretended not to notice, with large white chalk X's, and the rubber heels, thin to the nails, he marked with O's. Though it troubled him, he might have mixed up the letters. Max inquired the price, and the shoemaker cleared his throat and asked the boy, above Sobel's insistent hammering, would he please step through the side door there into the hall. Though surprised, Max did as the shoemaker requested, and Feld went in after him. For a minute, they were both silent, because Sobel had stopped banging, and it seemed they understood neither was to say anything until the noise began again. When it did, loudly, the shoemaker quickly told Max why he had asked to talk to him. Ever since you went to high school, he said, in the dimly lit hallway, I watched you in the morning go to the subway to school, and I said always to myself, this is a fine boy that he wants so much an education. Thanks, Max said, nervously alert. He was tall and grotesquely thin, with sharply cut features, particularly a beak-like nose. He was wearing a loose, long, slushy overcoat that hung down to his ankles, looking like a rug draped over his bony shoulders, and a soggy old brown hat, as battered as the shoes he had brought in. I am a businessman, the shoemaker abruptly said to conceal his embarrassment. So I will explain you right away why I talk to you. I have a girl, my daughter Miriam. She is 19, a very nice girl, and also so pretty that everybody looks on her when she passes by in the street. She is smart, always with a book, and I thought to myself that a boy like you, an educated boy, I thought maybe you will be interested sometime to meet a girl like this. He laughed a bit when he had finished, and was tempted to say more, but had the good sense not to. Max stared down like a hawk. For an uncomfortable second, he was silent. Then he asked, Did you say 19? Yes. Would it be all right to inquire if you have a picture of her? Just a minute. The shoemaker went into the store and hastily returned with a snapshot that Max held up to the light. "She's all right," he said. Feld waited. "And is she sensible? Not the flighty kind?" "She is very sensible." After another short pause, Max said it was okay with him if he met her. "Here is my telephone," said the shoemaker, hurriedly handing him a slip of paper. "Call her up. She comes home from work 6 o'clock. Max folded the paper and tucked it away into his worn leather wallet. "About the shoes?" he said. "How much did you say they will cost me?" "Don't worry about the price." "I'd just like to have an idea." $1, $1.50, $1.50, the shoemaker said. At once he felt bad, for he usually charged $2.25 for this kind of job. Either he should have asked the regular price or done the work for nothing. Later, as he entered the store, he was startled by a violent clanging and looked up to see Sobel pounding with all his might upon the naked last. It broke, the iron striking the floor and jumping with a thump against the wall. But before the enraged shoemaker could cry out, the assistant had torn his hat and coat from the hook and rushed out into the snow. So, Feld, who had looked forward to anticipating how it would go with his daughter and Max, instead had a great worry on his mind. Without his temperamental helper, he was a lost man, especially since it was years now that he had carried the store alone. The shoemaker had for an age suffered from a heart condition that threatened collapse if he dared exert himself. 5 years ago, after an attack, it had appeared as